The market was alive with strange sounds, the kind that made the skin crawl. Chains rattled as merchants pulled their captives into the open, and the smell of burning oil mixed with the stench of sweat and fear. In the center row of cages, hidden in shadows, sat a young alien girl. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, her thin arms bruised from iron cuffs that held her wrists together. She did not cry aloud, for tears only made the merchants laugh, but her glowing eyes revealed her suffering. She had been treated not as a person, but as a thing, a pet to be sold to the highest bidder. The crowd of buyers was mixed. Tall, scaled creatures with sharp teeth, merchants covered in robes with eyes that glowed red, and nobles with jeweled collars around their necks. They walked past the cages, pointing, mocking, and laughing. Some tapped the iron bars with sticks, watching the captives flinch, while others argued over which one would make the best servant, guard, or toy. The girl lowered her head each time someone came close, afraid of being chosen. She knew too well what ownership meant. For many nights, she had heard the screams of others when their cages were opened, and they never returned. The merchant who owned her stood proudly beside her cage, his thick tail dragging across the stone floor. "Rare stock," he shouted, his voice echoing across the hall. "She glows under the moons, obedient if tamed, and young enough to last for many cycles. Not just a pet, an ornament, a prize." His words sent shivers through her chest. To them, she was nothing but a trophy, a thing to show off. Her trembling fingers curled around the bars, but she dared not meet anyone's eyes. Laughter erupted nearby. A noble woman with silver horns leaned toward her companion and whispered, "She looks broken already. I bet she won't survive more than a season." They laughed as though her life was only a game, and the girl pressed her forehead to the cold metal, wishing to disappear. The auctioneer banged a hammer against a stone block. The hall quieted, though whispers still lingered. Torches flickered, throwing long shadows across the cages. The girl's heartbeat quickened. She knew her turn was coming. "Bring her out," the merchant barked, yanking the chain that ran from her collar to his hand. The iron pulled against her neck as the cage door swung open with a creak. Slowly, she crawled forward on trembling knees, her bare feet scraping against the rough ground. Every step felt heavier than the last. She wanted to resist, but she had learned long ago that resistance only brought pain. The crowd leaned closer. Some jeered, others whistled. A scaled buyer smirked and shouted, "She's thin, probably sick. I'll give half the price." The merchant snarled back, pulling her roughly so that her glowing skin caught the firelight. Gasps followed. In the flames, her body shimmered like crystal, delicate yet alive. "Look," the merchant boasted. "A treasure. Not sick, not weak, perfect." He lifted her chin so the buyers could see her face. Her eyes widened, filled with silent pleading, but the crowd only saw beauty in her despair. They murmured among themselves, voices sharp like knives. She wished to close her eyes, to block out the noise, but the sound of heavy boots caught her attention. Unlike the clawed feet and clicking limbs of the other aliens, this sound was firm, steady, and strange. The market fell quieter as the figure came into view. A human had entered. The girl had heard whispers of humans before, creatures from distant worlds, stubborn, reckless, and dangerous. Some said they were weak, others said they were cursed, but all agreed they did not belong in such markets. Yet here one stood, shoulders straight, eyes scanning the cages. His steps echoed in the silence, and wherever his gaze landed, the merchants looked uneasy. The human's clothes were simple compared to the jeweled nobles, yet his presence pulled every eye toward him. He did not speak at first. He only observed. His gaze passed over the other cages before it settled on her. Her breath caught. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not as a thing, but as someone alive. His eyes did not mock, did not weigh her value as property. They studied her chains, her wounds, and her trembling hands. For a brief moment, she forgot the cuffs around her wrists. The merchant forced a laugh to break the silence. "A human in my hall. What a surprise. Looking for something to decorate your ship? This one here. Perfect for you." He yanked the girl's chain again, making her stumble forward. Pain shot up her neck, and she gasped softly. The human did not laugh. He did not cheer. He only stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. The crowd began to whisper again, their voices filled with doubt. "Why is he here? Does he think he can buy like us? What could a human want with a pet?" The girl's heart pounded. Every instinct told her not to hope, for hope was dangerous, but her glowing eyes lifted slightly. She searched his face, desperate to know. Was he just another buyer or something else entirely? The auctioneer slammed the hammer once more, the sound cracking through the air. "Bidding starts now," he declared. Voices rose, numbers shouted, each higher than the last. The girl felt her stomach twist. She was being sold, traded like meat, her fate hanging in the hands of strangers. But the human did not join their laughter. He stood silent while the bids grew louder. Then, at the height of the noise, his voice finally broke through, calm but firm. "I'll take her." The hall froze. Whispers turned to shock. Heads spun toward him. No one expected a human to claim such a prize. The girl's breath caught again, her body trembling. She could not believe what she had heard. The merchant blinked, stunned, then sneered. "You? A human? You think you can afford her? This is no street market." The crowd erupted in cruel laughter, but the human's gaze never wavered. He did not back away, did not join their games. His eyes remained locked on her, and in them she saw something she had never seen before. Resolve. Her fingers tightened around the chain at her wrists. For the first time, the fire inside her heart flickered with something dangerous. Hope. The girl's knees were still pressed to the cold stone floor, her collar tugging against the chain. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her glowing eyes darting between the laughing nobles and the human who had just spoken. The market had gone silent for a moment, as if no one could believe what they had heard. A human claiming a prize in their hall was madness, yet his voice was steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. The alien nobles broke the silence first. A horned man sneered and leaned forward, his golden bracelets clinking as he laughed. "A human dares to bid here? Do you even know what she costs? Go back to your filthy colony." The crowd roared in cruel amusement, their voices mixing into a storm of laughter and insult. But the human didn't react. His expression stayed calm, his jaw tight, his eyes focused only on the girl. Her trembling hands gripped the iron chain. She wanted to look away, to protect herself from disappointment, but her gaze stayed locked with his. For years, she had seen nothing but greed and cruelty in the eyes of those who came to buy. Yet this time it was different. His eyes were sharp, but not cruel. They didn't see her as an object, not as an ornament to decorate a hall, not as an animal to break. He saw her. That simple truth shook her more than the collar around her neck. The merchant, however, was not amused. His tail slammed against the ground as he barked. "Enough of this foolishness! Bidding starts at 10 bars of silver ore." He tugged her chain harshly, forcing her to stumble forward again. The crowd turned their attention back to the auction, raising their hands one after another. 11 bars, shouted a scaled creature, his long tongue flicking in the air. 12, came a voice from the upper platform. 15, boomed the horned woman, her jeweled hands waving with excitement. The girl's stomach twisted. Each number was another step sealing her fate. The bids rose higher, the air filling with greedy energy. She bit her lip to hold back the small cry rising in her throat. Then, when the noise reached its peak, the human's voice broke through again. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply said, calm and certain, "I said I'll take her." The room froze a second time. This time, the silence was heavier, sharper. The alien nobles turned in disbelief. Their eyes narrowed, their mouths curled in mockery. "He doesn't even bid properly," someone scoffed. "He doesn't know the rules," another laughed. "Humans don't belong here." The merchant grinned wickedly. "You think this is some street game, human? You insult my hall, and you insult the honor of trade." He yanked the girl closer, his claws digging into her arm. She gasped in pain, her glowing skin bruising under his grip. The human's eyes darkened at the sight, his calm expression tightening with something sharper, anger. The girl's heart pounded. Something inside her whispered that he might fight, that he might challenge them all. But that thought seemed impossible. A single human against a hall full of armed aliens? She almost laughed at her own foolish hope. Still, she could not stop watching him, waiting for what he would do next. The bidding continued, but it had lost its rhythm. The human's presence disturbed them. Some buyers hesitated, unsure if they should challenge him or mock him further. The nobles whispered among themselves, their jeweled collars glittering as they leaned close. "Why does he want her?" one asked. "Is she valuable to humans?" another muttered. "Or is he just insane?" The girl's breath quickened. Each whisper only made her more aware of the human's steady gaze. It was as if his eyes alone built a shield around her. He hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken to her directly, yet she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Finally, the horned woman snapped her fingers, raising her bid high above the others. The merchant's grin widened. Sold, unless someone dares to go higher. His claws scratched at the girl's arm as if preparing to hand her over. The human stepped forward. His boots echoed against the stone, and the room fell quiet again. He stopped just before the platform, his shadow stretching across the girl's trembling body. His voice, still calm, carried a weight that silenced even the loudest noble. "She's not for you," he said. The words weren't shouted, but they hit harder than any roar. The crowd hissed, muttered, cursed. "How dare he? Arrogant human! Throw him out!" The merchant snarled, raising his hand to call the guards. The girl's pulse raced. She wanted to scream for him to run, to escape before they killed him, but no sound left her lips. Instead, she clutched the chain tighter, her glowing eyes fixed on his face. She didn't know if he was brave or simply foolish, but she knew one thing. He was different. The guards began to move, their heavy weapons clanging against their armor. The crowd cheered for the human's punishment, waiting to see him dragged away. The girl closed her eyes, bracing for the moment he would vanish like all hopes before. But when she opened them again, he was still there, unmoving, his gaze locked firmly on her. Her breath trembled. She had lived too long in chains to believe in miracles, yet the human's eyes refused to let her sink into despair. In them she saw fire, a promise unspoken. He would not leave her here. The merchant hissed loudly, waving at the guards. "Take him! Show this fool what happens to humans who forget their place." The crowd cheered louder, stamping their feet, their laughter sharp and cruel. But the girl didn't hear them anymore. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart, the sound of boots echoing closer, and the human's calm, steady voice still ringing in her mind. She wanted to scream his name, though she did not even know it. She wanted to reach for him, though her wrists were chained. She wanted, against all reason, to believe. And in that moment, as the guards closed in, she realized something terrifying. Hope was more dangerous than chains. Yet she could not stop herself from hoping that this human, this stranger, might be the one to break them. The air in the market grew heavier, as if everyone was waiting for a storm to break. The girl's collar dug into her skin as the merchant yanked her closer to the platform. Her knees scraped the stone floor, but she barely felt the pain. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on the human, the one who had dared to interrupt the bidding. He stood alone, surrounded by aliens who hated him, mocked him, and now prepared to tear him apart. The auctioneer slammed his hammer again. "Bidding continues. 20 bars of silver ore," he shouted, pointing to the horned woman. 21, came another voice. 22, echoed a scaled creature, his tongue flicking hungrily. The numbers rose higher and higher, their voices growing louder, the crowd feeding on greed and cruelty. But the human did not raise a number. He stepped forward, his boots steady against the stone floor. His voice came calm, but firm enough to silence the hall. "I said I'll take her." The laughter was instant and cruel. The nobles slapped their knees, some nearly falling from their seats in delight at what they thought was madness. "He doesn't even know how to bid," one shouted. "He thinks words are enough," cried another. The merchant sneered, his teeth sharp and glinting under the torchlight. "You are out of place, human. This is not your world. You cannot claim what you cannot pay for." The girl's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to stop, to save himself. No one had ever stood for her before, and now someone was about to lose their life for it. Yet her lips refused to move. She could only watch, frozen, her heart pounding. The guards stepped forward, heavy spears in their hands, the tips glowing faintly with energy. The crowd roared with approval. They wanted blood. They wanted to see the human dragged away, broken and humiliated. But the human's eyes did not waver. He looked straight at the merchant, then at the nobles who had been bidding, and finally at the girl. His gaze lingered on her chains, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the hall like thunder. "I don't need to bid. I don't need your rules. I'll take her, because no one deserves to be kept like this." The words were like a slap across the faces of everyone in the hall. The crowd gasped, then hissed, their voices turning sharp with rage. "How dare he? Arrogant creature! He insults us all! The horned woman stood up in fury, her jeweled hands trembling. You filthy human! You will pay with your life for such insolence! The merchant grinned with cruel delight. He thought the human had signed his own death. Then take him, he barked. The guards surged forward, their weapons raised. The girl gasped, her hands tightening around the iron chain. She wanted to close her eyes, but she could not. She could not look away from the human who was about to be cut down. But instead of fear, the human moved with certainty. He shifted his weight, his hand darting to his belt. In a flash, something metallic gleamed, a small weapon, simple by human standards, but strange and frightening to the aliens. The guards hesitated mid-step, their eyes narrowing in confusion. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. The human raised the weapon, but he did not point it at the guards. Instead, he aimed at the chain that bound the girl. With a sharp crack and a flash of light, the iron shattered, falling uselessly to the floor. The girl's eyes widened in shock, her wrists trembling as the weight vanished. She had dreamed of freedom, but she had never believed she would feel it. The crowd erupted in chaos. Screams filled the hall. Some shouted for guards to kill him. Others cried that he had broken sacred rules, while others simply stared in disbelief. The merchant roared with rage, his tail lashing violently across the ground. Seize him! Kill them both! The girl's breath came fast, her glowing eyes locked on the broken chain at her feet. She wanted to move, to run, but her body refused to obey. All she could do was stare at the human. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for only a second, and in that second she understood his message without words. Get ready. The guards lunged again, but this time the human moved with purpose. His weapon flared, forcing them to step back. He wasn't stronger. He wasn't bigger. But he was faster, sharper, and most of all, unafraid. Each strike of his weapon pushed the guards into retreat, and the crowd's jeers turned to uneasy silence. The merchant snarled, grabbing another chain to pull her back into captivity. But the girl stumbled away, her body reacting before her mind. She no longer wanted to hide. Something inside her burned, something the human's actions had lit, courage. Her trembling legs carried her toward him, the man who had dared to defy them all. The nobles shouted for her to stop, their voices filled with fury, but she ignored them. She reached his side, her wrists still raw from the cuffs. He stood tall beside her, his weapon humming softly in his hand, his shoulders squared against the sea of enemies before them. The merchant's face twisted with fury. You cannot leave. She is mine. She is property. His voice cracked through the hall. The human's reply was simple, but his words carried more weight than any weapon. Not anymore. The hall shook with outrage. Nobles screamed, guards surged, and the air filled with tension so sharp it could cut. The girl clung to his sleeve, her heart racing. She knew they could both die here, crushed by numbers, drowned by hatred. Yet for the first time in her life, she did not feel helpless. She looked at the broken chain lying on the stone floor. It was proof. Proof that hope was real. Proof that someone had finally seen her as more than a pet. The crowd moved closer, furious, and united against them. The girl's voice caught in her throat, but a single thought filled her mind, steady and fierce. She would rather die beside this human than live another moment in chains. The hall exploded into chaos the moment the chain fell to the ground. Nobles shouted, guards roared, and the auctioneer's hammer cracked against the stone until it splintered. The girl clutched the human's sleeve, her glowing eyes wide with terror. The crowd that once laughed was now a storm of fury, and the storm was rushing straight at them. The merchant's tail slammed against the floor as he screamed, "Seize them both!" Dozens of guards surged forward, their spears glowing with sharp light. The girl stumbled back, but the human pulled her close behind him, his arms steady as a wall. His weapon sparked again, and a flash of energy struck the ground, forcing the guards to halt. Smoke curled where the strike had landed, the scent of burned stone filling the air. The human's voice was low but firm. "We're leaving." The guards growled, forming a circle around them. The nobles leaned over their seats, shouting curses, demanding punishment. The merchant's eyes glowed with rage as he pointed his claw at the human. "No one defies me in my hall. Tear him apart." The guards lunged. The human moved fast, shoving the girl behind a broken cage as spears struck the ground where she had stood. Sparks flew. The girl gasped, her heart hammering in her chest. She expected him to fall in seconds, outnumbered and surrounded. But instead, he fought like a storm. He ducked under the first spear, drove his elbow into a guard's chest, then struck with his weapon again. A second guard fell back, snarling in pain. The girl crawled out from the broken cage, her wrists raw and bleeding, but her eyes never left him. He wasn't the strongest in the hall, but he moved with purpose, each step protecting her, each strike meant to clear a path. The guards pressed closer, their numbers overwhelming. The girl's throat tightened with fear. If they didn't escape soon, both of them would die here. The human grabbed her hand suddenly, his grip warm and strong. "Run!" he shouted. She stumbled to her feet, her legs weak from years in chains, but she followed. They darted between cages as the guards gave chase. Shouts echoed through the hall, the sound of boots and claws hammering the stone floor behind them. The marketplace outside was alive with rain and firelight. Stalls dripped with water. Torches sputtered under the storm. The human pulled her into the narrow alleys, his eyes scanning for escape. Behind them, the guards poured out like a flood, their voices cutting through the rain. The girl's breath came in sharp gasps. Her bare feet slipped on the wet stones, but the human never let go of her hand. He moved quickly, guiding her through winding paths she had never seen before. The city loomed above them. Towers of dark stone, bridges laced with chains, lights glowing through the storm. She had spent her life trapped inside cages, yet now she was running free, her heart pounding with fear and something new, wild exhilaration. "Stop them!" a guard shouted, and the clash of metal rang through the night. The human spun, blocking a strike with his arm before firing again. The blast sent sparks against the wet walls, lighting the alley for a second before plunging it back into shadow. The girl pressed against him, her body shaking, but he didn't falter. He moved forward, dragging her along, refusing to slow. They turned a corner and nearly ran straight into another squad of guards. The girl gasped, clutching his arm in terror. The guards grinned, their teeth sharp, their spears ready. They thought they had trapped him. But the human didn't stop. He grabbed a wooden cart and shoved it forward with all his strength. The cart toppled, crashing into the guards, spilling crates and barrels across the ground. Fruits and broken glass scattered in the rain as the guards stumbled. The human pulled her through the gap, their footsteps splashing in puddles as they ran. The marketplace was no longer a place of trade. It was a battlefield. Merchants screamed and fled, stalls overturned, torches extinguished in the storm. The girl clung to him, her breath sharp, her chest aching. She wanted to collapse, but he kept her moving. "Don't stop," he urged, his voice steady even under the storm. Arrows hissed through the rain, striking the walls around them. One barely missed her shoulder. She cried out, but the human pulled her lower, shielding her with his body as they rushed under a stone archway. His back took the scrape of a shot, but he didn't slow. He gritted his teeth, his eyes fierce. They darted through a narrow passage, the sound of the storm swallowing the shouts behind them. The girl stumbled again, her legs weak, but he caught her, lifting her against his chest. She gasped, clinging to him, her glowing eyes wide. No one had ever carried her before, not as a burden, but as something worth protecting. His arms were strong, steady, and even through her fear, warmth spread through her chest. The rain poured harder as he climbed a narrow staircase carved into the stone walls of the city. Guards below shouted, their voices echoing. But the storm hid their tracks, thunder drowning out the chase. The girl's breath trembled against his chest. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask why he was doing this, but her voice was lost in the storm. Finally, they burst onto a high bridge, the city sprawling out below them, lights flickering through the rain. The human set her down gently, his hand still gripping hers. They paused only for a second, both breathing hard, their chests heaving. She looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with confusion and wonder. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. He met her gaze, his face shadowed by the rain. "Because no one should live in chains." Her throat tightened, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. For so long, she had believed her life would begin and end inside a cage. Yet here she was, standing free beside someone who had risked everything for her. The shouts grew louder again, guards spilling onto the bridge. Their weapons glowed, their steps closing in. The human's hand tightened on hers. "We're not done yet," he said. The girl's heart pounded as they turned to run once more. Behind them, the storm raged, the guards roared, and the merchant's fury echoed through the night. Ahead of them lay only darkness and danger. But for the first time in her life, she did not fear the unknown. She had someone beside her, and that changed everything. The rain fell harder, washing the blood and dirt from the stone bridge as they finally slipped into a hidden alley. The human pushed aside a heavy wooden door, half broken and rusted, and pulled the girl inside. The place was dark, a forgotten storeroom that smelled of dust and old grain. He lowered the iron bar across the door, sealing them in. The noise of the guards faded, their shouts drowned by the storm outside. For the first time that night, silence surrounded them. The girl sank against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her wrists still burned from the cuffs that had been ripped away, the bruises dark against her glowing skin. Her legs trembled so badly she could hardly keep them straight. She had run farther tonight than she had ever walked in her life. The human crouched beside her, his face tired but calm, his eyes scanning her as if checking every wound. He pulled a small metal flask from his belt and offered it. She hesitated. Her whole life had taught her that gifts were never free, that kindness was always followed by pain. She shook her head weakly, pressing herself against the wall. He didn't push. He simply placed the flask on the ground near her and sat a little distance away, giving her space. His silence was strange. Alien nobles always shouted, cursed, or ordered. He just sat, his breathing steady, waiting. Her throat burned with thirst. After long minutes, she reached for the flask with shaking hands. The water inside was cool, cleaner than anything she had tasted in years. It slid down her throat like life itself. She drank too fast, coughing, and the human reached forward to steady her. His touch was gentle, his hand supporting her shoulder for only a moment before he pulled back. She blinked at him, confused. No one had ever touched her without force or cruelty. He unrolled a small bundle from his pack, revealing scraps of dried food. The scent made her stomach twist painfully. Hunger clawed at her. She hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. It was always hard to measure time inside a cage. But again, she hesitated. She looked at him suspiciously, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. The human met her gaze calmly. "Because you need it," he said simply. His words carried no demand, no expectation. Slowly, she took a piece, biting into it carefully. The taste was plain but filling. For a moment, she forgot the storm, the guards, the chains. Warmth spread through her chest. He watched her quietly as she ate, his expression unreadable. She wanted to ask 100 questions. Why he had risked his life, why he had chosen her, why he cared at all. But her voice caught each time she tried. Fear still lingered, a shadow that whispered this was just another trick, another cruel game. She had been broken too many times before to trust easily. When she finished eating, she curled up against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest. The human shifted closer, not too near, just enough that she could feel his presence. The small storeroom was cold, rain dripping from cracks above, but his body radiated warmth. Without thinking, she inched closer, the trembling in her legs slowly easing. He glanced at her, but said nothing, letting her choose the distance. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by thunder outside. Finally, her voice came again, soft and unsure. Why not leave me?" He turned his head toward her. His eyes were steady, his face calm. "Because you're not property," he said. "You're not a thing to be sold. You're alive. That's enough." Her breath caught. The words hit harder than chains. She had been called many names, pet, slave, toy, worthless, but never alive, never enough. She felt tears sting her eyes, hot against her cold skin. She turned her face away quickly, ashamed to let him see. But her body betrayed her. Her shoulders shook, small sobs escaping her throat. The human didn't move closer, didn't try to stop her tears. He only sat there, silent, steady as stone, letting her cry. That silence was the strangest comfort she had ever known. When her sobs finally faded, she wiped her glowing cheeks with trembling hands. She dared to glance at him again. He was leaning against the wall now, his weapon across his lap, his eyes half closed, but still alert. He looked tired, but his presence filled the room with something she couldn't explain. Safety. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Am I really free?" His eyes opened, and he looked at her directly. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. Her heart twisted painfully. The word was too heavy, too impossible. She shook her head. No, I can't be. They will come back. They will take me again. Her voice cracked, fear filling each word. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze firm. Not while I'm here. She stared at him, stunned by the certainty in his voice. No one had ever promised her anything before. Not like this. Promises were lies in her world, but something in his eyes made her believe, even if just for a moment. Exhaustion pulled at her body. Her eyes grew heavy, her mind spinning with confusion and fear and something dangerously close to hope. She curled tighter against the wall, but when she felt his warmth near, she let herself lean slightly toward him. His presence was steady, like a shield against the storm. The rain outside pounded harder, but inside the small storeroom, she felt the faintest taste of peace. She closed her eyes, her breath evening out. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to sleep without chains holding her down. The human stayed awake, his weapon ready, his eyes scanning the cracks of the door. He knew the guards would return. He knew the danger wasn't over. But when he glanced at her sleeping form, fragile and glowing softly in the dark, he knew he would fight them all again if he had to. She shifted in her sleep, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. Her hand brushed against his arm unconsciously, as if seeking safety even in dreams. He didn't move away. Instead, he let her rest, knowing tomorrow would bring new battles. But for this moment, in the heart of the storm, the bond between them was born, silent, fragile, and stronger than any chain. The night did not stay quiet for long. The girl woke to the sound of heavy boots splashing in the rain outside. Her glowing eyes snapped open, fear rushing back into her chest. She turned to the human, who was already awake, his weapon gripped tight in his hand. His face was calm, but sharp, his ears listening to every sound beyond the wooden door. The muffled voices outside grew louder. Guards were sweeping the streets, their torches glowing like angry stars in the storm. The merchant's voice carried above them all, harsh and filled with rage. Find them! Bring me the girl and the human's head! The girl's body trembled. She pressed her back against the wall, pulling her knees close. Every part of her screamed to hide, to curl up and disappear. She whispered, her voice shaking. They will find us. They always find us. The human crouched beside her, his eyes steady. He placed a hand gently on her chained wrists, the broken metal still hanging loose. Listen to me, he said, his voice low but firm. No one owns you, not anymore. Her breath caught. His words lit a fire inside her chest, but fear smothered it quickly. You don't understand, she whispered. They won't stop. Even if you fight them, more will come. I am not worth this. He shook his head. You are worth it, he said. His hand tightened slightly around her wrist, not in pain but in reassurance. They chained you. They called you property. But you are not. I will not let them take you again. The sound of boots grew closer. The door shook as someone shoved against it. The girl's glowing eyes widened, her breath coming in quick gasps. She clutched at his arm desperately. Run, she begged. Leave me here. If they catch you, they will kill you. At least you can survive. He looked at her, his jaw tightening, his eyes burning with something stronger than anger. No, he said. I don't run. The door cracked under another blow. Dust fell from the ceiling, the wood groaning. The girl whimpered softly, covering her ears. She couldn't watch him die. She couldn't bear to see the only person who had shown her kindness fall because of her. Tears welled in her glowing eyes, her body shaking so hard she thought her bones would break. The human stood, his figure blocking her from the door. His shoulders were squared, his weapon steady. He looked like a wall of flesh and bone, unmovable, unbreakable. The banging grew louder, then stopped suddenly. Silence filled the alley outside, a silence sharper than any scream. Then the door burst open, splinters flying through the room. Torches lit the small space, guards rushing inside with snarls and glowing spears. The merchant stood behind them, his face twisted with fury, his eyes locked on the girl. You belong to me, he roared. The girl cried out, pressing against the wall. Her hands covered her face, shame and terror choking her. She waited for the collar to be forced back onto her neck, for the cage to close again. But the human didn't move aside. He stepped forward, his weapon flaring. The first guard lunged, but the human's strike dropped him to the ground. The second swung his spear, but the human blocked with his arm and drove his shoulder into the guard's chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The merchant bellowed with rage, shoving past the guards. His claws reached for the girl, his tail whipping against the floor. She screamed, curling tighter, but the human moved faster. He grabbed the chain still hanging from her wrists and yanked her behind him. His voice thundered over the chaos. "She is not yours." The merchant snarled, his eyes glowing red with fury. "You are a fool, human. She is property. She has always been property. You cannot change that." The human's jaw clenched, his voice sharp as steel. "I already did." The fight raged in the cramped space. Spears clashed, sparks flew. The smell of burning metal filled the air. The girl could only watch through her tears, her heart pounding painfully. She wanted to run, to hide, but something inside her refused. His words echoed in her chest. "No one owns you." Her trembling legs pushed her forward. She stumbled toward him, her glowing hands gripping the fallen spear of a guard. She had never held a weapon before, never fought, but when another guard rushed toward the human's unguarded side, she swung with all her strength. The spear cracked against the guard's head, sending him sprawling to the floor. The human glanced at her in surprise, then gave a quick nod. "Good," he said, his voice calm even in the chaos. "Stay behind me, but don't be afraid." The girl's chest heaved, her arms shaking, but something strange burned inside her, something she had never felt before. She was not a pet, not a toy, not property. She was fighting, even if weakly, to choose her own fate. The guards began to falter. One by one they fell, some unconscious, others fleeing back into the storm. The merchant roared in frustration, his claws slashing wildly, his tail cracking the walls. But the human stood firm. With a final strike, he forced the merchant back through the doorway into the rain. The storm swallowed the night, lightning flashing across the sky. The human stepped out slowly, the girl just behind him, her glowing eyes locked on the merchant's twisted face. "You cannot protect her forever," the merchant spat, his voice thick with hatred. "They will always come. She will always be hunted. And when you fall, she will crawl back to the cage where she belongs." The girl flinched, but the human's hand found hers, steady and warm. He raised his weapon with his other hand, his voice cold and final. "She doesn't belong to a cage. She belongs to herself." The merchant snarled and lunged, but the storm roared louder, the human's strike flashing in the night. The girl's heart pounded, her fear clashing with the fire of hope that burned stronger with every word he spoke. For the first time in her life, she believed in the impossible. That maybe chains could be broken forever. The storm screamed across the rooftops as the final clash began. The merchant's claws tore through the air, his tail whipping with deadly force, but the human did not step back. He moved forward, his weapon flashing with sharp bursts of light. Sparks danced as steel met claw, the sound echoing against the wet stone walls. The girl stood behind him, her glowing hands trembling, her heart racing so fast it hurt. The merchant roared, his voice filled with fury. "You think you can change her fate, human? You are nothing here. You are weak." He lunged, his claws aiming for the human's throat. The girl gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. But the human ducked low, driving his shoulder into the merchant's chest and sending him stumbling back into the rain. They fought like beasts under the storm. The merchant's strength was monstrous, but the human's movements were sharp and fast, each step measured, each strike purposeful. Blood dripped down the human's arm where claws had cut him, but his eyes stayed locked forward, burning with determination. The girl could hardly breathe as she watched. Fear clawed at her heart, but something stronger was rising too. Every time he pushed the merchant back, every time he stood between her and danger, that strange fire inside her grew brighter. The merchant snarled, his voice shaking with rage. "She belongs to me! She is mine!" He struck again, claws scraping sparks against the human's weapon. "You cannot save her. You cannot save anyone." The human gritted his teeth, his jaw tight. His voice thundered back, louder than the storm. "She is not yours. She never was." The words shook the girl to her core. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to stand taller. The chain that had once dragged her down still hung broken at her wrists, but she no longer felt its weight. She was not a pet anymore. She was alive. The fight raged on, the storm pounding the city. The merchant grew desperate, his strikes wild, his balance slipping. The human waited for the moment, his body tense like a coiled spring. When the merchant lunged again, the human twisted aside, his weapon flashing in a final strike. The merchant staggered, his claws falling short. His tail cracked against the stone before his knees buckled. With a roar that turned to a choke, he fell to the ground, the storm washing over his broken body. The guards who had remained froze in place, their torches trembling in their hands. They looked at the human, at the glowing girl beside him, then fled into the night, their courage shattered. The girl stood frozen, her glowing eyes wide. The storm roared, but she heard nothing but the sound of her own heart. Slowly, she stepped forward, her bare feet splashing in the rain. The merchant who had owned her, who had treated her as nothing more than a toy, lay defeated. Chains no longer bound her. For the first time in her life, the cage was gone. She turned to the human, her chest trembling with emotion she could not name. He stood tall, his weapon lowered now, his breaths heavy. Blood streaked down his arm, his clothes torn, but his eyes were steady. He met her gaze, and in them she saw no pride, no arrogance, only truth. Her lips parted, her voice soft, fragile, but filled with awe. You saved me." He shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "you saved yourself. I only gave you the chance." Her tears fell freely, mixing with the rain. For so long she had believed she was worthless, that she was nothing but a pet to be used and discarded. Now she stood free, her chest burning with something she had never dared to feel. Hope. She reached for him, her trembling hands brushing his arm. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "Please, don't leave me." His hand covered hers, warm even in the freezing rain. "I won't," he said firmly. "From now on, you walk beside me. No more cages." The words struck deeper than any blade. Her sobs broke free, and she buried her face against his chest, clinging to him as the storm poured down. He held her steady, one arm around her back, his other hand still gripping his weapon, as if daring the world to try again. The city lights flickered in the distance, torches burning weak against the storm. Nobles would whisper, hunters would be sent, and the galaxy would not forgive what had happened tonight. But none of it mattered in that moment. She was no longer a chained creature to be bought and sold. She was free, and she had someone who believed in her freedom enough to fight the entire world for it. She lifted her head slowly, her glowing eyes meeting his once more. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. The human looked out into the storm, his jaw set. "Now," he said, "we build a life that no one can take away." Her heart clenched, fear and wonder mixing inside her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain: her life had changed forever. She would never again be silent in a cage, never again be a pet for others to laugh at. She was free, and she would walk into the unknown beside him. The storm began to ease, the rain softening, the thunder drifting farther away. The night air was cold, but it carried something new: peace. Together they stepped into the darkness of the alley, leaving the broken merchant and shattered chains behind. The girl glanced down at her wrists, the bruises still raw, the marks of her past carved into her skin. But when she looked up at the human beside her, she felt stronger. Her chains were gone. Her future was hers. The storm had not destroyed her. It had washed her clean. And as they disappeared into the night, she knew the galaxy would never see her the same way again. She was no one's pet. She was free.